You're going after non-criminal immigrants, U.S. citizens, and permanent legal residents. Donna Hughes Brown, Irish citizen, green card holder, 48 years in the United States. She also happens to be the mother of a U.S. Marine, sister to a retired Army colonel. She's in ICE detention since July. She tried to come back from Ireland, arrested, has been there since then. Her crime? She wrote 2 bad checks for less than $80 a decade ago. You arrested her, she's in custody. Her husband, Jim Brown, came to us and told us her story. Jim told us, I voted for President Trump because he promised to go after criminals in our community and not people like my wife. If I can, I'd like to play a video for you. Then he also voted for President Trump.
Yes, sir.
Why did you vote for him?
Because I was an idiot.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with my colleague from Texas. It is a tale of two cities. Secretary Noem, Trump administration, you're going after the worst of the worst criminals, and we agree with you. The problem is 70% of the people you've arrested have no criminal record. You're going after non-criminal immigrants, U.S. citizens, and permanent legal residents. Donna Hughes Brown, Irish citizen, green card holder, 48 years in the United States. She also happens to be the mother of a U.S. Marine, sister to a retired Army colonel. She's in ICE detention since July. She tried to come back from Ireland, arrested, has been there since then. Her crime? She wrote 2 bad checks for less than $80 a decade ago. You arrested her, she's in custody. Her husband, Jim Brown, came to us and told us her story. Jim told us, I voted for President Trump because he promised to go after criminals in our community and not people like my wife. If I can, I'd like to play a video for you. Then he also voted for President Trump.
Yes, sir.
Why did you vote for him?
Because I was an idiot. 80% of the evangelical Christian people were lied to, if you really want to know the truth, and that's exactly what happened. They said criminal, and I believe criminals need to be off the street.
I just want to make sure people watching this understand who you are.
My wife and I, when we don't work, we're ministers. We help the needy. That's what we do. And that's who they're arresting.
Now we've got Mr. Jim Brown before you. He's standing up. Hopefully you can talk to him a little bit. These people, Donna Hughes Brown, are not the individuals that should be deported. Another case, Narciso Barranco was beaten and arrested by masked agents while working as a landscaper. He's an undocumented immigrant, 30 years in this country, not a traffic ticket. Mr. Barranco is also the father of 3 U.S. Marines. 3 Marines. You want to make a movie of people like this. A man who comes to this country, instills patriotism in his kids. They swear an oath to serve and possibly give up their life for this country. We'll play a video on this as well, please.
Masked federal agents were filmed pinning a man to the ground and repeatedly striking him in the head and neck before putting him in an unmarked car. The man in the video has been identified as Narciso Barranco and is the father of 2 active duty Marines and 1 Marine veteran. The Department of Homeland Security said an illegal alien was arrested by Border Patrol agents after he, quote, assaulted federal law enforcement, adding that Barranco, quote, swung a weed whacker directly at an agent's face. Video shared by DHS and reviewed by CNN shows Barranco running with a weed whacker, but does not show him striking officers.
I also have with us today Alex Barranco behind you, a retired Marine. That's his father. And Alex, on behalf of myself, members here, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and we also thank your brothers for serving our great country. Thank you very much. Got another case. George Rete, 25-year-old, native of California, my home state. He's a U.S. citizen, Army veteran, who served in Iraq. Well, on his way to work, he came to an immigration checkpoint. Pulled over. I don't know where officers deployed tear gas on him, broke his car window, pepper sprayed him, and dragged him out of his car. An American citizen held for 72 hours without any charges, wasn't even given the opportunity to shower, to wash off that paper
Gentleman's
spray.
time's expired. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest. for
Mr.
5
Chairman, I
minutes.
have 2 articles I'd like to present for the record.
Unanimous consent?
Under President Trump, an agency intended to keep Americans safe has diverted resources from child abuse, trafficking, and terrorism to immigration enforcement. Second is this letter from my Orange County Sheriff, Don Barnes, essentially talking about all the individuals under Prop 50 referred to ICE 2025 year to date. 50 of them.
Without objection.
ICE never showed up to pick them up.
Without
Mr.
objection.
Chairman?
I will
Mr. Chairman?
entertain,
Chairman?
I will entertain UCs at the end of the hearing. I will entertain all UC motions at the end of the hearing. We have witnesses. I want to make sure everybody has time. So if we do this now, we do have a witness has to leave. You're just going to be taking time from other members, but I will entertain UC motions.
The moment that just unfolded in this hearing was not loud by Washington standards. There were no raised voices, no procedural theatrics. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. Congressman Lou Correa stood before the committee and did what Congress is supposed to do, but too often avoids. He held power up to a mirror. He named names. He showed faces. And he forced the room to confront the human consequences behind official talking points. It began with a promise, a familiar one. The assurance that enforcement would focus on the worst of the worst. Words that sound reassuring. Words that poll well. But then came the numbers. 70% of those arrested, Correa said, had no criminal record. And with that statistic, the narrative shifted. This was no longer an abstract debate about policy or borders. It became a reckoning over accuracy, accountability, and truth. Correa spoke of Donna Hughes Brown, an Irish citizen, a lawful permanent resident, a woman who had lived in the United States for nearly half a century, a mother of a U.S. Marine, a sister to a retired Army colonel. A woman who built her life here and believed, as millions do, that the system would recognize her humanity alongside her paperwork. Her offense was not violent. It was not recent. It was 2 bad checks written more than a decade ago, totaling less than $80. Yet she remained in detention for months. Then the hearing did something rare. It allowed the public to hear from her husband, a man who voted for the administration now holding his wife. A man who said, plainly and painfully, that he believed he had been misled. His words cut through the room not because they were polished, but because they were raw. He spoke as someone who trusted a promise and paid a price he never imagined. A man who serves his community. A man whose family embodies the values so often invoked in speeches. And yet, here they were. The power of that moment was not partisan. It was moral. It forced a question that no statistic alone can answer. If this is the outcome, then what exactly is the mission? Correa moved on. Another case, Narciso Barranco, a man who spent decades working quietly, raising a family, instilling a sense of duty so strong that his sons chose to serve this country in uniform. 3 Marines, 3 oaths taken in defense of a nation their father believed in. Video footage showed masked agents forcing him to the ground while he was on the job. Official statements claimed aggression. Independent review showed something else entirely. The gap between what was said and what was seen widened, and with it, public trust narrowed. Standing in the room was one of those sons, a retired Marine, silent, upright, watching his father's treatment discussed as a procedural matter. In that silence was a question no witness could answer easily. What does service mean if it does not extend dignity to those who raise the people willing to defend the nation? Then came George Rhee, a U.S. citizen, an Army veteran who served overseas, stopped at a checkpoint on his way to work, detained, his car damaged, chemical agents deployed, held for 3 days without charges, no immediate recourse, no explanation that matched the severity of the response. For 72 hours, an American who wore the uniform of this country was treated as though his rights were conditional. These were not isolated anecdotes offered for sympathy. They were examples entered into the record to illustrate a pattern, a system that, according to testimony, redirected resources away from core public safety priorities and toward enforcement actions that swept broadly rather than carefully. A system that, in some cases, failed to follow through even when local authorities requested coordination, leaving serious matters unresolved while focusing elsewhere. This is where the hearing transcended policy disagreement and entered a deeper territory. Because government authority is not measured solely by how forcefully it acts, but by how precisely it acts. Justice is not defined by volume or speed, but by discernment. And leadership is revealed not in slogans, but in outcomes. Secretary Kristi Noem sat before the committee as these stories were laid out. She represents an administration that frames its approach as firm and necessary. And firmness has its place. Laws matter, borders matter, order matters. But so does proportionality, so does accuracy. So does the basic expectation that enforcement will distinguish between genuine threats and people whose lives reflect long-standing ties to this country. What Correa exposed was not just individual hardship, it was a credibility problem. When official narratives collapse under video evidence, when citizens and lawful residents are caught in a system that does not slow down long enough to verify who it is acting against. When families connected to military service find themselves explaining their loyalty rather than being recognized for it. This hearing asked Americans to consider whether the system still remembers the difference between authority and justice, whether efficiency has replaced judgment, whether the language of safety has become disconnected from the reality on the ground. In a functioning democracy, oversight exists for moments like this, not to score points, but to recalibrate power, to remind agencies that legitimacy is earned every day through restraint, transparency, and respect for rights. When those elements erode, trust erodes with them. And without trust, even the strongest institutions begin to fracture. The stories shared today were not comfortable. They were not meant to be. They were meant to linger, to follow viewers long after the hearing adjourned. To challenge the assumption that policy outcomes are clean, controlled, and evenly applied. Because at the end of the day, the measure of a nation is not how loudly it declares its values, but how faithfully it applies them when no one is watching. Especially when the people affected do not have power, press conferences, or influence. This hearing ended, as all hearings do, with time expiring and the gavel moving on. But the questions it raised remain unresolved, and they belong not just to lawmakers, but to the public they represent. Watch closely. Demand clarity. And remember that accountability does not weaken a nation, it strengthens it. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA, support our work to expose the truth.